It's the harvest season, a time when many of us gather with friends and family and enjoy delicious food, maybe under the sukkah in our backyards or at the Thanksgiving table. We head to the grocery store, lists in hand, to gather the things we need to make comforting and delicious feasts for our loved ones. We spend hours in the kitchen making pies, basting turkeys, and mashing potatoes, but we rarely stop to think about where that food comes from, or the people whose labor brings it to our tables. And as it turns out, some of those people are Jews. For some, the idea of a Jewish farmer might be unexpected, or even like an oxymoron. But Judaism at its heart is an agrarian tradition. And there's a deep and rich history of Jewish farmers in the American South, cultivating land from the Carolina Lowcountry to the Appalachians to the Mississippi Delta to the Great Plains. Since their arrival in the South, Jews have been connected to the farming industry and have seen it evolve over time. From plantations worked by enslaved people, to sharecropping, to small family farms, to the large-scale industrial farming operations of the present. My name is Nora Katz, and I'm the host and producer of the ISJL Virtual Vacation. Over the past few months, I've been lucky to have thought-provoking, challenging, and meaningful conversations with people who are connected to the long legacy of Southern Jewish farmers. In this episode, we're talking about land, what it means and how we can be stewards of it. We're talking about labor and climate, and the ways in which corporate farming can be extractive to both the people who work on farms and the land that is farmed. We're learning about a new generation of Jews who are stewarding land in ways that support their local communities. And we're learning about how Jews are connected to all of this work in myriad complex and beautiful ways. Let's dive in. To get a sense of the long history of farming in the Jewish South, I spoke to Deborah Lamensdorf Jacobs, whose family has been farming cotton in the Mississippi Delta for 4 generations.
I'm Deborah Lamensdorf Jacobs, and I was born in Starkville, Mississippi. My family grows cotton in Sharkey County in the Mississippi Delta. My great-grandfather bought his first piece of cotton land in 1990. And it's been continuously farmed by our family, including this year. So 4th generation of cotton farming in the Mississippi Delta, and specifically in the lower Mississippi Delta. My great-grandfather, Morris Grunfest, was about 15 years old in 1884 when his family sent him to America, probably to avoid being conscripted into the Russian army. So they were from Minsk, which is now in Belarus. He came into the Lower East Side. We came into the Port of New York and then lived on the Lower East Side. We know from documents that he was a cloak maker. So he was working probably on Hester Street in a sweatshop. And at the parallel time in the Mississippi Delta, which is a very specific part of Mississippi, there was land that was being cleared. It was an area that had a lot of annual flooding every spring from the Mississippi River, but that was beginning to be under control. The railroads were coming in, so it was really expanding. A number of Jewish families had moved into the Mississippi Delta, and word got out, especially up in where the immigrant aid societies were overwhelmed. But word got out, there was opportunity in the Mississippi Delta. So there was a huge wave of all sorts of immigrants who came into the Mississippi Delta. So that's how Morris Grunfest, and by that time he was married and had 3 children, came to the Mississippi Delta.
I should mention that the Mississippi Delta is the alluvial floodplain in the northwestern part of the state between the Mississippi and Yazoo rivers. Thousands of years of silt deposits from the Mississippi River have made the Delta one of the most fertile agricultural regions in the world. You can learn more about it in our episode, Visit the Mississippi Delta. Deborah's family members are part of a larger pattern of Jewish migration and settlement in the Delta.
So when people came to the Mississippi Delta, they were looking for opportunity. And usually what they were is, first they were peddlers, and then a step up from being a peddler is to own a store. And then if you had capital, you would buy available land. As people needed to sell land or land became available, that was another source of income, was to own farmland and actually to farm. So a lot of times these older immigrant waves would come in, and as the families didn't have the people in their family that were interested in farming, they could either rent the land or sell the land. And they usually, a lot of times, the Jewish families would sell to each other. So a lot of the land that's been owned by Jewish families stay within Jewish families. There's a relationship there, or relatives are selling to relatives. So it's a lovely relationship. Also, there were Jewish families that were able to be in that supply chain of cotton farming. So there were Jewish families in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and the Mississippi Delta that were in the business of selling cottonseed. There were there were people who became cotton brokers. They would actually buy the cotton from the producers and then turn around and be the middleman and sell it to the fiber mills, the people who were going to spin it into yarn. So it was some arbitrage going on there. So there was a great situation. Or say if you had a cotton gin, you may be ginning for other farmers, or you'd be ginning for your relatives, your Jewish relatives. And that's how our gin came to be, Grunfest and Klaus, is that they came together and created their own cotton gin.
Jews arrived in the Delta as it was evolving into the landscape we know today, and they took on leadership roles in the community.
When Jews came into the area, they realized that for this to be a prosperous area for their families, they had to be part of the structure of society. They had to be involved in the schools. They had to be involved in commerce organizations. And they really jumped to those opportunities to have stronger communities for themselves, to make money for their children, and to have Jewish life, for all Jews to have a community, a Jewish community there. So they became involved on the boards of banks, the Bank of Anguilla, for example. A lot of Jewish families were part of that. That is one of the banks that did survive the 1929 stock market crash. Not all banks, not all agricultural agricultural-based banks survived the 1929 crash of the stock market. Then they became involved in those organizations such as Delta Council, as Staple Cotton, that were helped the communities be stronger, helped them to be a really vibrant place for business. They were on the school boards. They were on civic organizations. They were mayors. We had a number of mayors with up and down the Mississippi Delta who were Jewish. One is Sam Rosenthal, who was mayor of Rolling Fork for several decades, and he was always acting on behalf of what was best for that community. So that's what they were known for, and they had probably a different profile than you would have in northern cities or in larger metropolitan cities. They were really known for being a part of the community and strengthening the community.
But the Delta is also a place that is defined by racial and economic injustice. The Grunfest family farm was run by a Jewish family, but the day-to-day labor was done by African American tenant farmers who lived and worked on the land. These farmers didn't have access to the power and capital of their employers and lived under the oppression of Jim Crow.
One of the things that you begin to notice is you notice certainly the racial divide in the Mississippi Delta.
But life in the Delta isn't just black and white. There's tremendous ethnic diversity in the Delta. African Americans, Jews, Italians, Chinese, and Mexican immigrants. These groups formed complex social and economic relationships in the Delta. Deborah remembers her family relying on others in the community when they fell on hard times.
It was really an ecosystem of all the groups, everyone helping each other to form a strong community, form strong businesses, and form a community that cared about one another. There was a time where there was a crop failure. My grandparents had a crop failure, and my grandmother went to the Chinese grocery store and asked Samsung if she could please buy on credit. So probably for an entire year, the Chinese grocery store extended credit for them to buy groceries for an entire year. And it was through that kindness, it was through that sense of community, it was through that sense that everyone had to do well, that our Jewish family was beholden to this Chinese grocery store, and so appreciative. And after that point, even though a new grocery store came in or different people would establish grocery stores, my grandmother became incredibly loyal to Samsung. And she would never, as she would say, trade. She would never trade with any other grocery store other than Samsung.
But the Delta has changed. With the increasing mechanization of agriculture, small family farms are few and far between. And generations of Jews have left the Delta for opportunities in larger cities.
As far as families in the Mississippi Delta who are actively producing cotton, that number has gone down, and it increasingly goes down because you need a really generational farming. You need a number of people who are invested in the process to know the process and to be involved in the process. Most farmers, I would think, most Jewish farmers want to be in a Jewish community. Most Jewish farmers want to have schools, places that they can be in a Jewish community and the community for their kids. We do have a Jewish camp in Mississippi, and there are opportunities for Jewish children to actually be together within this area without having to go like I did. I went to Missouri until we had our own camp at Henry S. Jacobs in Utica, Mississippi. But as people go to college and they begin to major in things other than agriculture, if they're not going to have that agrarian lifestyle, then they're going to go into law or medicine. If they're going to go into business, they need to live where their income is. And that's what's really basic. You live where your income is. And just as Jews came from New York and came down into the Mississippi Delta for opportunity, Jews still are looking for opportunity to do what's best for their family and to live in their communities and to practice their religion.
I asked Deborah to talk about the current state of the farm and the family cotton gin. What does it look like to produce cotton in the present?
So we currently are still producing cotton. My brother lives in Rolling Fork, Mississippi, and he runs the family farm. Most family farms in that area do have several members of the family, and it's usually a multi-generational farm. And right now, my brother is the one who is running the farm. And I don't know, he was running it with my father, and now he runs the farm. So we have a very active gin. Our county used to have 9 cotton gins. Now there's one, Frunfest and Klaus gin. It's a high-speed gin. It's state-of-the-art. And a lot of what we do, our equipment is state-of-the-art. So it is really an active and it's still looked upon as some of the best practices between land practices, within producing practices, harvest practices, ginning practices. It's really state-of-the-art through agricultural terms.
I was excited to speak with Deborah because of her long family history in the farming industry. But there are Jews of my generation who are the first in their families to work as farmers. I spoke to my friend Sam Humphrey, who lives here in Jackson, Mississippi, about life as a small urban farmer.
Well, I'm Sam Humphrey, owner of Fertile Ground Farms here in Jackson, Mississippi. I'm born and raised here in Jackson, and left and studied out of state and came back and started farming. Fertile Ground Farms is Jackson's only chemical-free urban farm. We follow organic and regenerative practices. Everything's focused on soil health and building the capacity of the soil and increasing the quality of the soil and the environment that we're in so that we manage this ecosystem to be able to have a higher capacity to produce food and enrich us.
I asked Sam to talk about his farming philosophy, about the meaning of regenerative agriculture.
Regenerative basically means that I'm managing the ecosystem foundationally to support the biological life that exists, and using that biology to grow food and raise the plants and animals. As opposed to conventional industrial agriculture, you're bypassing biology by using chemicals to produce the food and skipping that biology. And when I guess break it down simply, regenerative is I'm managing this to be a healthy, functional ecosystem, not a food factory. And so I make decisions that are related to making this ecosystem healthier and stronger, and usually it's more management intensive than the conventional. I'm not just like throw fertilizer here, spray some stuff here, and run the big tractor and that's it. It's a lot of small things that add up over time.
Sam's work is also closely connected to community.
I've made a lot of strategic partnerships with different community organizations, from Wormworks that's here on site, the vermicomposting operation, to the Good Samaritan Center. We work with all of as many local neighbors as possible, and we've worked with the Jackson Medical Mall. We've done nonprofit projects like the Fertile Ground Project with the City of Jackson, and so I'm making those partnerships within the community. And then as far as the produce, I'm selling it primarily at the Mississippi Farmers Market every Saturday. I'm there 50 weekends out of the year, every Saturday, and either me or my mom. And I'll also sell to a number of local restaurants, and it's generally the higher end restaurants with chefs that appreciate and understand the quality and value of the local food, and I think they can afford to be that higher price per plate, as they can kind of have a little bit more liberty with what they're purchasing, versus some restaurants that it's just about the price per plate. It's not about the quality of ingredients or what's going, it's just get their cost as low as possible, which is reasonable. While I'm selling at the farmers market, I'm a part of the WIC, WIC and the Mississippi Department of Health and Agriculture have a program where certain like Medicaid, Medicare, like seniors as well as WIC recipients, they give these checks that these $5 checks. You'll get like a stack of 10 or 50 or $100 worth, and then you can go, and certain vendors at the farmers market accept those, and so then it enables people, low resource folks, to purchase food at no cost to them, which I'm a part of that program. Also take SNAP and EBT, and have been pushing the Double Bucks program to get started at the Mississippi Farmers Market. And so I think that's probably the most accessible and affordable place for anybody can come and get it. But I have found that, at least with the restaurants, some are easier to work with than others, and I enjoy the ones that I work with. But I'm in this position where I'm selling food to my produce to restaurants that I can't afford to eat at. That's definitely been an interesting dynamic, being able to grow all this stuff and sell it to folks, but then not being able to eat it or buy it myself. Like, I'm not going to Whole Foods and buying all that. Like, I just can't afford that. So, I'm a small and low resource farmer as well. So, it's a interesting position.
Sam is a Jewish farmer, but doesn't run a Jewish farm. You might be asking, what even is a Jewish farm? Organizations like the Jewish Farmer Network are dedicated to this idea of Jewish farming, of tying a progressive religious thread into their work. I spoke to S.J. Selden, co-founder and board chair of the Jewish Farmer Network, about their work engaging with Jewish tradition through farming.
My name is SJ Selden. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a co founder and the current board chair of Jewish Farmer Network. I am currently on ancestral Cherokee and Catawba lands outside of Asheville, North Carolina, on a Jewish community farm project called Yesod Farm+Kitchen. Jewish Farmer Network is a farmer founded nonprofit that connects Jewish farmers to resources and community and education at the intersections of Judaism and agriculture.
Both SJ and Sam have a lot to say about what's Jewish about farming. They come at it from different angles, but I'll let them speak for themselves.
Judaism is at its roots an agrarian tradition. Torah includes so many commandments and stories specifically aimed at this question of how do we live on land together such that all are fed, and really a core concern of our ancestors was collective nourishment. How do we make sure that everybody eats? And how do we make sure that we can do that in a way that allows us to be in relationship with land long term for the long haul? So much of Jewish history since then has been a story of diaspora and of exile and of wandering. And what gets lost in that story is the reality that we're an agrarian people and that we have continued to be in relationship with land and with food throughout all of our many wanderings, whether that was just, a small, pot on the counter holding a little bit of herbs, or larger fields and farms, depending upon like what was accessible to us legally and socially and financially throughout the diasporas. Jews have been farming continuously throughout our entire history. For Jewish farmers, or for farmers who happen to be Jews, there's often a tremendous lack of availability of education that this is true about this story and about this narrative, and about the tremendous depth and breadth of Jewish wisdom, specifically at this intersection of Judaism and agriculture. People who are Jewish and farming often don't know that their calendar, the Jewish calendar, is an agrarian calendar that is really centered on, when are the harvests and how do we celebrate together. And so much of what Jewish Farmer Network has really emerged to do is to meet people who are Jewish and farming, and to say, like, you have a deep well of history and of wisdom and of ideas and technologies that are deeply relevant to what you are already doing.
You can see the God or higher power or whatever, and kind of get some of that by connecting with nature and being in the soil, and seeing this giant plant come up from a little tiny seed. There's something special to that, and so just being in nature, I find myself more connected to the earth and those types of things. I view the soil as the skin of the earth, and if we're going to be tending to it and treating it right, it needs to be moisturized and exfoliated and all those things. You want it to be happy, not crusty and flaky or whatever. Yeah, this isn't a Jewish farm. This is a secular farm with a Jewish farmer. I'm not one to push, any sort of beliefs or anything on somebody else. And so, yeah, I just think, for me, it's just about treating, the natural world and everything in it and everybody in it with, respect that they deserve, and, just caring for each other, and, that's basically it. Share the surplus and try to leave it better than you found it.
This is the context that the Jewish Farmer Network comes from.
Jewish Farmer Network emerged in early 2017. I was at a Jewish food conference run by Hazon up at the Isabella Friedman Jewish Retreat Center in Connecticut. It was an interesting experience of being at a Jewish food conference where I'd very much gone looking for other Jewish farmers, and seeing that in that particular year, there was nothing on the calendar, on the schedule for Jewish farmers about Jewish agriculture, even though there was, the farm on site at this specific place. And the organizer of the event very graciously said, yes, you can self-organize a conversation among Jewish farmers, and that's what was made. And I ended up facilitating a conversation with 13 Jewish farmers who were at this conference, including Shani Mink, my co-founder and the current executive director of Jewish Farmer Network. And we just talked. We just talked about what it meant to be a Jewish farmer and what that looked like for us. And the big takeaways from that conversation were that people felt that there was a deep overlap in their own lives between Jewish and farmer, that those identities were very much interwoven, that farming was something that people were doing because they wanted to and because it was deeply meaningful to them, even though it was tremendously economically challenging for many people to farm and to find ways to farm under capitalism that supported them and their families. And I think most saliently, people felt incredibly alone. There was a deep, deep sense of loneliness and of isolation and of feeling invisible as a Jew in farming spaces and invisible as a farmer in Jewish spaces. And the takeaway from that conversation was, well, let's just find a way to connect more. So we made a Facebook group, and within 2 days, there were 200 people in that Facebook group, for Jewish farmers. And that group's since grown to about 1,400 people. And Shani and I, in the subsequent weeks and years, have just been in conversation with each other in chavruta, the holy Jewish practice of being in a learning group with another person, trying to understand what is it that Jewish farmers need and want, and how can we, as fellow Jewish farmers, help meet those needs and desires. And from there, Jewish Farmer Network has grown into a nonprofit that has an annual conference where we bring together wisdom and people at that intersection of Judaism and agriculture, a number of affinity group spaces where people who are disabled Jewish in farming, queer Jewish in farming, can come together at those intersecting identities and interests for greater community. And our most recent project is that we launched a zine, an educational pamphlet that called Shovels and Shofars, that helps Jewish farmers understand their rights and to practice their religious practices on farms, and helps them self-advocate to their farm bosses and managers for accommodations for their practices.
I asked Sam and SJ to talk about their farming origin stories and the values and beliefs that brought them to this work.
So I grew up here, and at the time, and probably still now, Mississippi is one of the most unhealthy states in the country. And I went to school. I left Mississippi after high school, went to college in Colorado, and at the time, living in Boulder, it was the healthiest city in the country. So I was at these two juxtapositions of living in the healthiest place and being from the most unhealthy place. And I was studying environmental science and was just, seeing a lot of turmoil in the world. And I thought, if I was sitting up on the mountain overlooking the city and was kind of not satisfied with where I was at and what I was doing, and talking with one of my friends, I just thought, I had this realization, if I could learn how to grow healthy food and feed it to unhealthy people, that might help them have healthier bodies and minds, which might lead to healthier thoughts and actions, and ultimately a healthier community, healthier society, healthier planet. And so then I was like, well, I need to figure out how to start growing food. And then that's what I did. I left Colorado and went abroad to Costa Rica for a semester and studied environmental justice and social justice and tropical ecology, and transferred to Warren Wilson, a small college, agricultural college in North Carolina, and studied sustainable agriculture there and majored in that, and worked on the college farm and garden, and then raised a bunch of chickens and vegetables and all that, and made my way to Georgia at a large pasture-raised livestock operation, and then came back to Mississippi and worked for a nonprofit, helping the Piney Woods School, historically African-American boarding high school, reinvigorate their farming program and work with students and put food in the cafeteria, as well as do a lot of hands-on trainings and demonstrations for farmers across Mississippi and throughout the South that were interested in more small-scale organic agricultural practices. And then I started Fertile Ground Farms here in 2019 and been rolling here ever since.
I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill for undergrad and graduated with a degree in American Studies, having spent most of my time actually studying systems of oppression and histories of oppression in the United States, and really trying to understand what was my role in creating a more just and kind world. And having really struggled with being in classrooms and with being indoors and doing more intellectual, less embodied work, I realized that I needed to find outdoors embodied work that also was helping create this world that I was dreaming of, that I think many of us are dreaming of. So in classic postgrad fashion, I went on a road trip, and in which I was looking for different kinds of work to do and also looking for different places to call home. I was born in Jacksonville, Florida. I've lived in North Carolina for, at this point, a majority of my life. And as a diasporic Jew, I've felt a very shallow relationship to place throughout my life. Like the idea was like, any place can be home. So what are the conditions of home that I want to look for and optimize for now that I'm, graduated and able to kind of pick and choose where I want to be. And these questions led me to understanding that I didn't know how food was grown. I didn't have an embodied understanding of the food system, and that felt like a tremendous gap in my education, that I'd gone to highly regarded schools and I graduated and still didn't know how food worked. Felt like so egregious to me, like just so deeply offensive, that I was considered educated as a human and didn't have any understanding of the food system. I ended up taking an internship at what's now called Root Cause Farm, which is about a 1 acre community garden that grows food for, by, and with the community of Fairview, North Carolina, and donates all their produce to the local community. And I was incredibly taken with a couple things about that experience. One was how good my body and mind felt doing the physical work of farming. A second was how community members coming together to do agricultural work in the garden created a basis of relationship and trust, allowed people to have actually really hard conversations about hard topics. So my body felt great. I was seeing community happen in a really powerful way. And this third thing for me was, wow, I'm doing the work of my ancestors. I had gone to Jewish day school. I was very active in Jewish youth group. I was careful to not go to Hillel too often because I didn't want to get sucked into a leadership position that I didn't want to fulfill. I was really well ensconced in the Jewish world. And no one had ever said to me that Jews are an agrarian people with an agricultural tradition. And it felt so obvious when I was there farming that that was true, and that there was such power and wisdom and nourishment in an agrarian Judaism. And that really set me on a path to looking for more community-based models for agriculture, and for more Jewish farmers, and for more people and wisdom at this intersection of Judaism and agriculture that I could learn with and from.
Something that Deborah, SJ, and Sam all talked about was the idea of doing this work and being Jewish in the South. All three of them share a deep commitment to this place, to stories of the Jewish South, and to the lessons it can teach us.
For me, Southern Jewry, and I think also rural Jewry, those being like a Venn diagram that isn't, that has spaces of each that aren't exactly overlapping, can uphold a real value in what it means to live as a minority as a Jewish person, and to live amongst our neighbors in a way that is, I want to say, more complex than for folks who are living in places with larger Jewish concentrations and larger Jewish visibility. For me, and from other people who I know and love who are Southern Jewish farmers, like that, our very existence kind of blows a hole in those stereotypes. Our very existence says, oh, Jews are not just that. And that feels like a very powerful way of being for me.
We always thought it was normal. All of our relatives were somehow involved in the farm business. So we thought there was nothing unusual to us growing up and knowing that we were cotton farmers. It was not until I began to go to camp outside of the area that people begin to notice and say, that's really unusual. And then you realize that really how special it is to be part of a Jewish farming family in Mississippi. It really is unique. And people would ask, what was it like growing up Jewish in Mississippi? And the idea was it was really an honor. We were the ones who defined Judaism for our neighbors. They didn't have a lot of these prejudices that maybe were in larger cities, or certain tropes about Jewish people. We defined what Judaism was for our neighbors. We defined what we did as far as caring for our aged. We defined what we did about supporting the community through charity. We defined what it was like being involved in the community and standing up for people. We defined Judaism. So when people in other areas may have certain stereotypes about Jews that we didn't necessarily have, and we became the example. And it was really a privilege. There are not many people in this world who, as a child or as an adult, define Judaism to their neighbors.
When I first got back to Mississippi in 2016, 2017, and got into organic agriculture here, most people, especially farmers that I would engage with, would tell me that it's impossible to grow organically here. You just can't do it. There's too many bugs and pests and weeds and blah, blah, blah. And it was just all about how I couldn't do it. I wasn't going to be successful. And then when I was at Piney Woods and was established that farming here for the first time, it became less about, it was like, okay, you can do it, and here I'm going to show you how. And then I haven't really gotten any of that since. But this kind of agriculture is really popular around the country, out west, up in the Northeast, and, in the Midwest. But down south, it's really not as popular. There aren't a whole lot of farms, focused on these kind of practices, and small farms in particular. If I wasn't doing this here in the city, there would be no organic farm in the city. There's just not a whole lot of people here engaged in this, and then there's a big knowledge barrier, since the Mississippi State and other land grant institutions don't teach this kind of stuff. The extension services and USDA and all the people that are here aren't going to teach you, so it's really important to be here to be able to spread and share that knowledge, as well as to provide food to people here. And with Jackson being a pretty large food desert, I think 3/4 of the city is a food desert, and Mississippi 2/3 of the state, just people don't have access to healthy fruits and vegetables, and they have access to fast food and convenience store stuff and processed foods and all that, but as far as food access, it's very limited. So I think it's just important to be growing food where people are, and to just get it to them, have it be accessible and affordable. And then once we can get food into people's bellies, then we can start to really talk about the nuances of how that food is grown, and where it's coming from, and all those types of things. But for here, Mississippi's a huge agricultural state, but most of our agricultural products are intended for livestock, or they're not for human consumption, or they're shipped off out overseas. So we're producing a lot, but we're not feeding the people here. And so just it's food justice work, along with breaking some of the educational and historic systemic barriers.
This connection to the South is, of course, a connection to place. I asked our interviewees about this idea of being connected to the land, especially in the context of tending the land as a farmer.
I feel a connection to the land because it actually represents not only, especially in the Mississippi Delta, because not only the way the Delta was formed, but it's true of my family in general. It's layers, it's different generations of people who actually farmed and did well and prospered by farming that land. And although we may not always be actively farming the land, I hope that we will always have the land. But that's the beauty of it, is to feel that you are part Not only did we settle there, literally we put down roots, and every year we put down roots. It's just a beautiful process of every year in April, they plant the seed with the hopes, and it's almost like a new generation. It's a new generation of a crop. We have a new generation of family, and we want them to know how they came to this land, why this land is important, what it means to our family, and the security and the opportunity it means to our family to own this land.
Deborah's family's connection to the land that they have owned for generations represents one of many ways that Southern Jewish farmers think about place. For farmers like Sam and SJ, land ownership is less accessible, and farming means connecting to a more diasporic vision of place and ideas of land stewardship and liberation.
One of the things that I think Judaism knows and teaches is that human beings are very much of the earth. Like Adam and Adamah, person and earth, it comes from the same root. And in the Torah story, like the first human is created from handfuls of dust from various corners of the earth, and then formed into a human being with the breath of the divine. So I think that in a cultural context, there's a very strong understanding that humans and Jews are of the earth. We are from the earth. We are not separate from nature. We are nature. And I think in many human beings, there's that yearning, whether we can recognize it as such or not, there's this yearning for earth connection, for connection to land and to place. And so much of the pain of diaspora, as I see it and feel it, is this feeling of alienation from place and alienation from land.
Being from Mississippi and, and farming here and being a young white man, a lot of the small organic agriculture is very white male centric and primarily, and while farming might be a predominantly female occupation around the world, in the United States it's an occupation by either old white men or young white men with very little diversity and support. I mean, there is, but the number of black farmers in the nation has gone down 80% over the last 100 years. And I think that farming in the South, you need to be able to understand and recognize the historical injustice and all the current issues that people face, and being able to to account for that, and it's partly why I'm here, and because I wanted to be able to and primarily work with historically disadvantaged farmers and black farmers, and be able to increase their quality of product and their production so that then they can increase their quality of life and their income, and start helping them build generational wealth on the land that that they have. And even me with the resources and support that I have, I know and see other farmers with less, and I want to be able to take what I have and the privilege that I'm offered to be able to make a better impact, to make an impact on in that regard, so that I can help build up other farmers and the farming community around me.
I spoke to Sam at the end of August, and now Fertile Ground Farms is in a moment of transition. Sam and his landlord were unable to come to an agreement for a new lease, which meant that Sam needed to close the farm. It's not the end of his career in farming, it will just take a different shape in the future. Sam will continue working with other low-resourced farmers and will continue collaborating with other small farming businesses in the area. This challenge and the possibility of losing the land that he's been farming for the past several years is something that Sam and I discussed back in August.
Land access is the biggest issue. If tomorrow the landlord's you're gone, I don't have land to go to. What happens to all of this? It being able to, if you're farming somewhere, you need to be able to build the equity in that space, because it's a long-term investment. If you're not able to capture that long-term investment, then Short term, you'll see it, and that's why most small farms go out of business within the first like 3 to 5 years. And if you can make it past year 5, then you're probably going to be successful. But it's really tough to get there.
So for me, like the act of farming as a Jewish person, particularly the act of farming for me as a Jewish person, farming lands that are not my ancestral lands, is to say like I get to connect to land and I get to learn what it is to be in relationship with land and with the original stewards of the land that I'm on in ways that are respectful and reciprocal and honoring of my ancestors and honoring of these ancestors and honoring of all descendants, people and otherwise, and just to steward land with that kavanah, with that intention as a Jewish person feels like a very sacred reclaiming of Jewish ancestral wisdom. I think there's a lot of beauty and there's a lot of resistance and reclamation that comes with Jewish people farming and Jewish people learning how to farm in diaspora as an act of solidarity with indigenous sovereignty movements, as opposed to continued complicity with colonization. There have been Jewish farmers who have done so underneath plantation models and who've done so in the wake and as beneficiaries of colonization. And that's not the only way to farm. And I think that there's some really exciting things happening in the Jewish farming world around Jewish agricultural solidarity with liberation movements and with land liberation movements that are deeply rooted in Jewish wisdom. And it's exciting to be farming at this time.
Judaism is tied to farming in so many ways. Deborah found a way to make that connection a physical one by creating family heirlooms that cross time.
Many years ago, we had a family reunion, and I began to realize that we didn't have a lot of physical heritage from my ancestors. We didn't have my great-grandfather's tallis. We didn't have the Shabbat candles from my great-grandmother. We didn't have physical heritage. And I began to think that the only thing we really had that was really from my great-grandfather was this first piece of cotton land that he bought in 1919. And certainly the family bought more land afterwards, but that was the beginning of us being in the cotton business, was this first piece of cotton land. My children both were having bar mitzvahs being scheduled into the future. And it finally came to me that the way that I was going to bring our heritage together, our Jewish heritage and our farming heritage together, was creating to weave these together, literally weave this together. I asked my father, who was farming the land at that time, if he could actually pick the cotton from that first piece of cotton land, from those 200 acres, and run it through the gin by itself, and actually have that fiber that came from Morris Grunfest's first piece of cotton land. And so that's what he did. He actually had fiber. He ran through the gin. This is actually cotton that has gone through a cotton gin. It no longer has cotton seeds. It no longer has sticks and stems. So this is ready to be going into a bale. And then what we did is the next step is to have that cotton woven into yarn. And from there, literally, we did weave. With this yarn, I contacted a weaver in Georgia, and I went and met with her, and I would sit down at her loom. She put our cotton on her loom, and then I would weave, and I would weave the tallises for my children for their bar mitzvah. I wove a tallis for my father. I wove it for my husband and for other family members. We also, and this is an example of one of the talit. And this is the neck piece of the tallis. This is the part that goes behind the neck. And literally this says, from generation to generation, lador vador, from generation to generation. And then we created our own symbol of Delta Jews. It is the Jewish star, which is represented by two triangles, an upward facing triangle and a downward facing triangle. And just as the Mississippi Delta is actually a triangle, the land formation is a triangle, and also the Greek letter delta is a triangle, and it means change. And that's what we did, is we combined them two. So there's the star, but within it is a blue triangle, meaning change. And that's what we look at. There are stripes in the talus. The stripes represent both the Mississippi Delta land formation, the layering of soil, but it also is the layering of generations. It's how the generations. And then there is another stripe that represents, and more or less is motion. It's the stripe here, and it is always change. It's the change. It's how people move. It's how we've moved through the Delta to other areas. It's the movement of the Mississippi River. So it is also the layers that are stagnant, but it's also the change that we all create by moving around.
Farming is also built into the rhythm of the Jewish calendar. We just ended the year 5782, a Shemitah or sabbatical year, that marks the end of the 7-year agricultural cycle outlined in the Torah. Most of us think of this as the year that the land is supposed to lie fallow, but it's much more than that.
My friend and teacher Justin Goldstein talks about how if you had to reduce Jewish agriculture to like 2 words, to its like smallest unit, it's everybody eats. And I love that, and I love the ways that Jewish agricultural wisdom creates limits on power and creates systems of regular redistribution of power, land, and resources in order to ensure collective nourishment as best as it could as an Iron Age philosophy. And so some of the exciting parts of Jewish agriculture that really get at this sense of collective nourishment are Ma'aser, the tithing system. So the idea that really about 20%, roughly 20% of what a Jewish farmer grows is not theirs. It belongs to kind of this trifecta of the orphan, the widow, and the stranger, the immigrant, which is meant to represent people who don't have access to land and resources. And that the role of the farmer is to reunite the people whose food this already is with the food that is theirs, that has been growing in the farmer's field, which is beautiful. Like beautiful, the idea that like the food's not yours and your job is just to like carry it over, to tend it, but then to reunite it with people for whom it actually does belong. So that's a beautiful like piece of wisdom. And there are so many other like ways in which the food is not yours or ceases to be yours as a farmer. So shichacha is the idea that like when you drop some produce, you don't get to turn around and pick it back up and claim it as yours. It's like once it's fallen out of your hands, it's not yours any longer, and it belongs to the collective and to the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. Heya, the idea of designating a corner of your field also for the same group of people without land access for their food security purposes. So even in 6 years out of every 7 years, you have a huge portion of food that a farmer grows that within the Jewish agrarian system isn't the farmers, it belongs to the collective. And simultaneously, all of the Jewish agrarian calendar, all of the Jewish calendar is these cycles of 7. The first 7 is Shabbat, the 6 days of a work week, and the 7th day of Shabbat. The idea that like you work for 6 days and then the 7th day you get rest. And this same system exists on the scale of years. So humans and animals get rest on every 7 days, and the land itself gets rest every 7th year. And the idea is that you're creating, systemically creating, for 6 years, a food system that is resilient and diversified and has systems of redistribution, so that in your 7th year, you're not growing any annual vegetables, and yet people are still eating. And actually the purpose of the system is for people to eat. And when I teach this in classes, I ask, so what are you eating in that 7th year? And the answers that I get, and the answers that are that you're eating storage crops, right? Grain, other things that you can put up, in my climate, that's like sweet potatoes and winter squash, corn. You're eating preserved foods, you're eating wild foods, you're eating the aftergrowth of your harvest. So modern agriculture tells us to harvest every single little bit, but Jewish agriculture says if you drop it, it's not yours. And what that does is it builds up the seed bank. It means that you have seeds in the ground that are from fallen fruits, so that in the 7th year, when you're not, plowing your field and growing more vegetables, there's actually still vegetables growing out of the ground that are volunteers, which is just a totally different way of managing land, to treat fallen fruit first as not yours, and second as future food. It's maybe someone's going to come get that food and eat it tomorrow through a gleaning system. Maybe actually I'm going to eat that food, or people are going to eat that food in a couple years in the Shemitah year, because that seed will then grow up into new food. So Jewish agriculture creates a system in which for 6 years you are planning and growing and storing food and meeting your neighbors and making sure that you understand where food is needed and how to get it to the people who need it. And in 7th year, the Shemitah year, you're living in that world. You're living in a world of redistribution and of food abundance. That's not magic. That's not divine intervention. It's human planning and cooperation. And I think that, I love Shemitah. This is my first Shemitah year that I've been consciously aware that it is been Shemitah. And because I'm living and working on a Jewish community farm, we've really been getting to experiment with Shemitah and to observe it in our own ways, knowing that as diasporic Jews, we're not obligated to observe the Lasher Shemitah, but we're invited to learn from it and to play with it and to be in experimentation with this ancestral tradition. And I'm just constantly in awe at the ways that it gives us a glimpse, Shemitah gives us a glimpse of a world that is different from the one that we're living in now. And creates some really tangible pathways to build that world together.
I do it makes me think about permaculture principles that I've studied, where the three main core principles are care for the earth, care for people, and fair share. And the fair share can be, I'm given food and to all the insects and the bees and everybody flying around. So being able to share, I don't need to take 100% out of here. I'm happy to leave 10% to probably just be happy if it was 10%. That you'd lose to to nature. And so I just think it's just kind of like I said before, that organic and regenerative agriculture. It's that foundation and that you're coming from and how you're approaching your management and your values and your decisions that are going to determine how you're how you're going to treat the farm, and probably how you're treating people as well. And so that's kind of the angle I like to go after.
My favorite Shemitah anecdote from this year is that one of the blocks in our field is a strawberry patch. And this year, when the strawberries started to come in and to ripen, I had this incredible heart-opening experience of going into the strawberries and seeing all these slugs just feasting on these beautiful strawberries. And any other year, this would have been so frustrating. It would have been, this kind of posture of these slugs are eating our strawberries. The slug is eating my strawberries. But in Shemitah, the animals and the creatures and all the humans have an equal right and share of the food that grows in the land. So in this year, the slug wasn't eating my strawberries. The slug was eating its strawberry. And it was so joyous. It was so joyous to watch slugs eat strawberries with that posture of, that, yes, it's theirs, it's ours, it's for sharing, it's not mine. Nothing is being taken from me. And I'm so grateful for the wisdom of our ancestors who understood that humans are so quick to say, this is mine. I put a fence around it. I worked for it. I planted it. Selling this is going to feed my family or send my kids to school. It's mine. Humans are so quick to do that. And Shemitah teaches us not so much. No, actually, this is ours. It's for the collective. And we forget that at our peril. And I love the reminder of Shemitah to really dig back into the collectiveness of land and of food, and to seek more and more ways to affirm, no, it's not mine, it's ours.
It was such a pleasure to talk to Deborah, SJ, and Sam about the deep roots of the Jewish farming tradition, both the Jewish ancestral farming tradition of the Torah, and also the ways in which Jews have worked as farmers in the South for hundreds of years. But I also want to think about the future of Jewish farming, especially in a world where food insecurity and the climate crisis continue to worsen.
For the future, I want to be in a space that is gonna, help me, that I'm gonna be able to grow in and be able to expand the operation. One thing I think that's been missing for me is having livestock. I think that the integration and balance of livestock and plants is really important for a farm ecosystem, since they didn't evolve separately. Plants and animals and fungi all evolved together, so we should be managing them in an ecosystem together. And so, I want to be able to have a space where I can produce more, have more enterprises like the livestock and orchard crops, as well as what this space has been, and be able to expand is an educational demonstration farm as well as a productive space. And so I'm really trying to balance those two things and be able to, I really believe if you want to provide the best education, then having a productive farm is going to be the best way to do that. So I'd like it to be applicable to the farmers who got skin in the game that are looking to learn the best practices, as well as a space for home gardeners and kids and whatnot to come and visit and learn and be able to interact.
My long-term vision and hope for the world is one of collective liberation, the freedom of all lands and all peoples. And I believe that Jewish farmers, equipped with the wisdom of our ancestors and with deep community, are an incredible force towards being a part of creating that world. And that can and will take many, many forms. In this world that we live in, Olam Hazeh, the world that is, we're facing some really challenging issues of climate collapse and of extractive capitalism, the ways that our current economic system takes advantage of the land and of people's labor and human beings. And I just hope that Jewish Farmer Network can be a part of turning the tide on some of these big sticky issues of power that we're facing in the world. And that Jewish farmers, along with farmers of many backgrounds and many ancestries, can work together to create a world where everyone is fed, and where land is being stewarded by the people who've stewarded that land for generations and generations and generations. A world of indigenous sovereignty and of collective freedom.
That's a wonderful answer to that question, and I'm hoping for that world too.
Can you hear it so, and may it be so?
Thank you so much to Deborah Lamensdorf-Jacobs, Sam Humphrey, and SJ Selden for lending their expertise to this episode. My thanks also to Marcy Cohen-Ferris for connecting me to the Jewish Farmer Network, and to Rachel Glazer for all of her support bringing us to Fertile Ground Farms. You can learn more about the Jewish Farmer Network, register for their upcoming conference, and get a copy of their new zine, Shovels and Shofars, on their website, which is linked in the description of this video. Follow Fertile Ground Farms on social media to stay tuned for what's next for the farm, and learn more about Jewish farmers in the Mississippi Delta, past and present, in the Encyclopedia of Southern Jewish Communities. This episode was made possible by a grant from the Mississippi Humanities Council, through support from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time for more stories from the Jewish South.